introduce Chris Harris. But I'm going to tell you, he's going to wander around. Okay? So this is a little different. He doesn't sit still. Okay? But I do want to introduce his wife, Norma. And she told me I could share this. Norma's a Democrat. She is a Latina. She was born in Mexico. But who encouraged Chris to vote for Trump? Norma. Okay? Chris shared that he was like, well, I'm not voting for Hillary, but that Trump guy's a little too wild. But Norma convinced him to vote for Trump. So we welcome all of you, and she'll be taking pictures. And Chris, as we've advertised, is a former Border Patrol agent. Wendy, where are you, Wendy? Oh, Wendy and I had the pleasure of hearing Chris in Sacramento at the Tea Party caucus, of which Antifa was trying to bust out the windows. It wasn't exciting, but I will tell you that I have told the San Jose Police Department, and they're going to drive by. But no problem. No problem, because Chris can defend himself. Okay. So, Chris, it's all yours.
Usually I don't use these. They said I need to use this because they're taping it. 36 years in law enforcement, I can project my voice. I'm Irish, so I'm going to walk around. Those of you came early to get up here, you're kind of screwed. I'm going to be back there. Well, the light's on. All right. This is why I'm not real good at these things. So my name's Chris Harris. I spent 36 years in law enforcement. A little background. I started at the ripe old age of 18 in New York. I became a New York State correction officer, and I got assigned to a fun little place called Sing Sing. So one of the things I said, I'm Irish. I was a cop in New York. I curse. I'll try not to. My wife gets on me, but if I slip, So after being at Sing Sing and watching the riot in January '83, they took 18 officers, my brother officers, hostage for 3 days. The interesting thing they did was they put them all in a different cell. Each officer was in a different cell. Each one was put into inmate clothing, and each one had a hooded executioner assigned to him. So if we went in to take back the cell block by force, they were going to execute all 18 officers. So after 3 days of negotiations, we got the officers out. Every one of them resigned. Those of us that were involved in a riot got to go to other prisons. I went to another maximum security prison, spent several years being a New York State correction officer, got out, became a cop, took a $14,000 pay cut, best thing I ever did. I'm a detective. What I wanted to do was be a deputy U.S. Marshal. A buddy of mine had worked with me. He had gone to the Treasury Department, from there to the U.S. Marshal Service. So he said, this is the way to go. When I got to the Treasury Department as a federal officer, they really weren't hiring. But it was the first big push in Border Patrol's history. We had about 4,000 agents at the time for the whole country. This was in the early to mid-'90s. They started doing a big hiring push. I had already been a street cop, a detective. My chief for the Treasury Department said, I'm not going to send you down to FLETC, which is the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. See, now I'm going to move now, screw you all. Too constricting back there. I like a little space around me. All these, my chief said, I'm not going to send you down to FLETC because you know how to be a cop. I don't need to send you there to be, to learn how to be a cop. I'm going to send the new hires down there. And he did, and they started coming back, oh man, there's a group down there called the Border Patrol. Now in New York, we had never heard of the Border Patrol. Never heard of them. We probably had 4 agents on the northern border at the time. But they're like, these guys, they run everywhere, they march everywhere, they chant. Their PT is like the Marine Corps PT. These guys are hardcore. Oh, that's interesting. What do they do? Well, they work narcotics. Well, I was a narcotics detective. I was trained by the DEA. Went to DEA Narcotics Investigator School, worked on task forces. I said, wow, that sounds cool. That's up my alley. What else? Well, they do city patrol. I've done that. That's a lot of fun. But they also work in the great outdoors. I was like, man, I always wanted to do that. And the other thing is, and God bless anybody that stayed in one place all your life. If you're happy with that and that's what you chose, God bless. But I told my wife, my first wife, she passed away, unfortunately, at a young age in 2002. But I told my wife that I didn't want to be 85 years old in my rocking chair on my porch saying I was born here, I went to school here, I raised my kids here, and I'm going to die here. And then anybody from New York or where it's cold? Yeah, it sucks. The winters suck. So back then, we didn't have the electronic door locks. You would have to heat the key of your car with a lighter to the lock would be frozen. When there was a state of emergency because of blizzard, we still had to go to work. Cops still had to go to work. 2 hours shoving your car. You'd pick up nurses, bring them to the hospital, and you go to work. That sucked. So I put in for the Border Patrol, and I got a packet from them. And basically what this packet said was, and I'm going to use this term because President Trump uses it, so if he can use it, it's good. Basically it said you might be sent to a shithole. Literally. They said substandard housing, substandard schools, substandard medical, and probably no job for your spouse on the southwest border. And my wife, God bless her, said, I'll go there, but I don't really want to take our teenage daughters there. I said, no, I still got a good job as a cop here. I don't need to go there. And then they sent me a packet after that that said San Diego. I said, San Diego? Okay. Heard that it's always 70, 75 there, sunny every single day, beautiful. Something completely different, Monty Python. So I put in for the job, and I got it, and I got assigned to San Diego. Now, I got to tell you, is there any native Californios in here? Okay, you're all freaking liars. Every single one of you is a liar. I came out during El Nino, 97. It rained every freaking day for months. And I'm on midnight shift because I got zero seniority. They're teaching us about hypothermia. Really? I left New York for this? And then El Nino stopped, and then what did we get? It was May, and it was gray. And I said, what the hell is this? They said, that's May gray. Really? Okay, it's June. What's this now? Oh, this is June gloom. Y'all liars. Now, it got better. It got better. So that's my background, 36 years in law enforcement. I just retired from the Border Patrol after 22 years. I've been assigned to the Imperial Beach Border Patrol Station for that whole time, a San Diego sector, from the ocean to the San Ysidro Port of Entry and 40 miles north. I have worked on details. I've worked in Ajo, Arizona. I worked in Douglas, and that does fall in the category of a shithole. Nobody's from Douglas, right? I don't care about that either. That's a crappy little town, and this is why we have a high attrition rate, because people get assigned there and they can't get out of there. I've worked El Centro, I've worked Campo. So I've worked different areas, but I've been assigned to Imperial Beach Border Patrol Station for 22 years, almost 22 years. I'm also a labor guy. I'm a union guy. My mom was a nurse. I watched her on strike in New York. My dad was a teacher. I watched him on strike. My first PBA's association was with the Teamsters. I know it comes out weird for Republican. I am a conservative on a lot of things, but I am a labor guy. I'm a union guy. When I retired, I was Director of Legislative and Political Affairs for our union down here, National Border Patrol Council. I was on the executive board. We were the first union to endorse President Trump. First time we ever endorsed a president, first time we ever endorsed anybody was President Trump. You will see on TV sometimes our National Border Patrol Council president, Brandon Judd. I know Brandon well. I've been in D.C. with him. He meets with the president. One of the things why we endorsed President Trump was he said, I am going to consider you guys the subject matter experts on this, not some attorney from the ACLU, not some professor from Harvard, you guys who do this every day. So if that and nothing, and he has listened to us. I don't pay attention to everything else he does. This is my wheelhouse. He said he wanted a wall, all right? He's a big proponent and fan of Israel. It drove me crazy, and I thought it was hilarious when he got elected and they said he was anti-Semitic. I'm like, you know his daughter and grandchildren are Jewish, right? You're an idiot. But he's been to Israel. He saw the anti-terrorism wall. He saw that it works. Now, it does work, but there's different paradigm. They have different rules of engagement. We don't want them. We told him we need to be able to see through it. We need a fence, not a wall. We need to be able to see our adversaries when they're setting up ambushes. I got hit in the head in 2006 with a rock from a smuggler. I had 4 years of traumatic brain injury. I was out of work. Wouldn't wish that on anybody. So we need to see through it, and that's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. He's giving us a fence. He's giving us barriers. And stop using the term wall. The left loves that term. It has a negative connotation to it, the Berlin Wall, things like that. It's a fence. It's a barrier. And when people say fences don't work, they're idiots. All the gold bullion at Fort Knox is not sitting in a field with a bunch of MIT-comps around it, guarding it. There's walls and fences. They do that because they work. Go to your local bank. The money's not sitting out in the open. There's walls, fences, and vaults around it. Why? Because they work. All right, so I'm going to go off a little bit on this. I've done this probably about my maybe 90th talk. I tend to do a lot of the Republican women groups for whatever reason. They seem to like me. I used to actually talk to groups left of center. They don't do that anymore, but I actually enjoyed it. But I've been asked a few times to explain DHS and how it works into component parts, because this seems to confuse a lot of people. And then I realized when I was meeting with congressmen that even they didn't know sometimes how DHS worked. So I'll do a little rundown. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, was formed after 2011 because the federal government realized it was doing a crappy job of protecting the American citizens. They had information, they had other things going on, they didn't connect the dots. So what they did was they took 22 disparate federal agencies and smooshed them together, and that is a technical term, smooshed. They smooshed them, you can laugh, that's funny. They smooshed them together, and that's everything from FEMA to Coast Guard to Secret Service, et cetera. Put them all together. And I hate to tell you this, but DHS is dysfunctional. It does not work well. It's unwieldy, and there's a lot of problems with it. I was there in the Senate and the House when they were forming it. One of the problems was my own agency, which I'm very proud of, but United States Border Patrol Management hid. After 9/11, they hid. They didn't want to take any mea culpas for 9/11. And they really shouldn't have, because it really wasn't their fault, but they didn't want to take any chances of catching any of the blame. So when they had big meetings to discuss how to form this new super entity, DHS, Border Patrol Management didn't show up. Or if they did, I had a friend of mine, he was the lowest type of supervisor we have, captain's bars. He said, Chris, I'd go to the meetings, I'd sit in the corner, keep my mouth shut. There were 4-star generals and admirals in there. So Border Patrol Management didn't show up. And the problem with that was they were disbanding INS. So if you ever hear in the press or anybody talk about INS like it still exists, it doesn't. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. Immigration Naturalization Service was broken up. It does not exist anymore. So what they're trying to figure out is what to do with the Border Patrol. And I remember being in Congress and watching people pound on the podiums going, we need an agency that goes after these visa overstays. We need an agency that will do that. Because we all remember a lot of those terrorists in 9/11 were visa overstays. Well, that was the Border Patrol's job. Now, that wasn't our fault that we didn't do it. INS, our parent agency, wouldn't let us do it. So if any of our management had been honest and willing to take even the slightest bit of a hit, they would have come forward and said, yeah, that's us. You gave us the statutory authority. If you want us to do it, we'll go after visa overstays. Unfortunately, this is 2018. How many years later is that? 2019, excuse me. So it's 18 years later. I'm a Border Patrol agent, not a mathematician. So unfortunately, we still can't go after visa overstays. But what they did was they created a separate entity, a separate agency called ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. God bless my brothers and sisters in ICE. You probably have heard of or seen Tom Homan. I know Tom Homan, the former director of ICE. He's a former Border Patrol agent. But ICE is a duplicative agency. It's exactly what Border Patrol was supposed to do. In fact, they took a chunk of Border Patrol to form ICE, our anti-smuggling unit. So when they took Border Patrol, what to do? Well, they came up with a sub-agency of DHS called CBP. Impress your friends, get this right. It's Customs and Border Protection, not Customs and Border Patrol. And again, if you see the press saying Customs and Border Patrol, stop listening to them because they're idiots. That's like them telling you, oh, I interviewed an FBI agent, a Federal Bureau of Interview agent. You look at them and go, yeah, you know what you're talking about. Customs and Border Protection, subcomponent part of DHS. It has 3 component parts. One is Office of Air and Marine. Anybody in here in the Marine Corps or former Marines? Wow, usually this area of the country we get a fair amount. Anyway, the Marine Corps has its own Air Force, its own integral air arm. It won't give it up because it learned to its chagrin that it needs pilots that are willing to fly low and slow and give them close air support. No offense to the Air Force, but they like to fly high and fast. So the Marine Corps has its own integral air arm, and what it is their pilots are Marines first, pilots second. We had that. We had our own integral air arm. Our guys were agents first, pilots second. They would land their helicopters and make arrests. Literally out in the desert, land and make the arrest. So they took that away from us, and they formed a separate air arm that belongs to CBP, Office of Air and Marine. There's another group, the biggest one is Office of Field Operations. When you go through a port of entry, a land port, a seaport, or an airport, you will see people in a blue uniform. Those are Office of Field Operations, Customs and Border Protection officers. They're not us. So when you go through the port of entry at San Ysidro, and one of the guys is maybe a little rude to you, and you call me up and say, Chris, your guys are idiots. I'm going to say, what color uniform? You're going to say blue. I'm going to say, that ain't us. We wear green when we're in uniform. We can work anywhere in the country. We are federal agents everywhere in the country. It's commonwealths, it's territories. We have agents stationed at embassies around the world. We have agents doing combat patrols in Bogota or in Colombia. We have agents inside to Iraq. So we have the authority everywhere in the country. Sometimes people get a little confused. We light them up, and they're like, oh, you only have 25 miles within the border. No, we have extended authorities within 25 miles, but we're federal agents everywhere in the U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers generally are only assigned to the ports of entry, and that's where their authority is. We can work at the ports. We do at times to assist, but we usually work in between the ports. So you have those 3 subcomponent parts, Office of Air and Marine, United States Border Patrol, Office of Field Operations, they belong to Customs and Border Protection, which has a commissioner, and that commissioner then answers to Department of Homeland Security Secretary. That's one of the problems, that extra layer of bureaucracy. We've been saying for years now we need to be a standalone agency, and by that I mean Coast Guard standalone agency. It belongs to DHS. The admiral in charge answers to the Secretary of Homeland Security. Secret Service, the director, answers to the Secretary of Homeland Security. The director of FEMA answers to the Secretary of Homeland Security. My chief, Carla Peterson, wonderful woman in D.C., 4 stars, she has to answer to a commissioner who then answers to the secretary. So there's an extra level of bureaucracy that's causing a lot of grief for us. Now, hopefully we'll get a little better now because Kev Macklin, who was CBP commissioner, is now acting secretary. I know Kev. He's a scary, smart guy. So hopefully there'll be a little bit of help. One of the problems with every secretary we've had of Homeland Security since it's been formed, none of them really cared about border security. Nobody wanted to get into immigration enforcement or any of that. The last one, she started getting into it. I appreciate that, but she waited too long. The border is out of control, and we'll talk about that in a second. The border is absolutely out of control. So that's how DHS works. A couple things, and then I like to get into question and answers very quick, but let me explain a couple of the things on the border. We have found that there are 3 ways that you need, 3 things you need to secure the border. And you can do it because we did it in San Diego, in most parts of San Diego. When I came in 22 years ago, on a rainy night, we were catching 1,000 people. My record, and we'd remove them. My record is catching the same group 3 times in one night. Sent to Mexico, come back, sent to Mexico, come back. But we were removing them, and that's what's not happening now. Everybody now is being released into the United States. So what we found, though, to secure the borders, you need 3 things. Infrastructure, technology, and manpower. That trite phrase, boots on the ground. You need all 3, and you need that balance. Now, if you have a lot of good technology and a lot of good infrastructure, you can use a little less manpower, but you still absolutely have to have that manpower. And when I say infrastructure, I don't mean a wall. I mean fencing, barriers, roadways, stadium lighting. That's all infrastructure. Technology. We have radios now that are so crappy. When I was doing border tours for the union, I would take people out. They could see that I would try to talk to somebody 100 yards away. I'd have a service vehicle, service radio. They couldn't hear it. Literally, I could see the guy, but he can't hear me on the radio. So you're always worried you're going to be bleeding out, calling for help, nobody will hear you. So you need radios that work. You need better IR infrared cameras, thermal imaging cameras. There's still a camera at my station that's Vietnam era, Gen 1. When it breaks down, they have to fabricate the parts because the company went out of business in 2003. So we need good technology. The manpower is critical. Congress has mandated statutory minimum 21,370 agents for the whole country. We have 19,000 and change. We're 2,000 below our statutory minimum. Forget what Trump said about giving us an extra 5,000. We just want to get back to our statutory minimum. And I'll explain to you why that's a problem. A couple years ago, management asked me and a couple other union guys to watch this footage of one of our drones. I think it was Texas. And we fly one of the Global Hawks or whatever it is. We don't fly them in San Diego because it's restricted airspace, but we fly them in New Mexico, Texas, Arizona. And they were like, Chris, look at this. Look at the view. The cameraman zooming in. And so 3 vehicles were crossing the border where there was no fence, nothing. And they were like, you could zoom in and you could see the bundles of narcotics in the back of the 3 SUVs. That's great. And then they stopped the film, like, oh, how great it was. They were trying to impress us. And I said, but I know that story. You guys tracked those vehicles for 3 hours, or 30 minutes. There were no agents available, and you just stopped tracking them. So here's what you did with that $50 million drone without the manpower. We all better know what Casablanca is, the movie. Here's my shock face. You told me there's narcotics coming into this country. $50 million to let me know that narcotics are illegally coming in this country. That's what that drone did. Without the manpower to interdict that, it was absolutely worthless. So those are the 3 things. Now, that was working until the last administration. And I'm not one to continually blast previous administrations. I don't like when Democrats do it. I don't do it. But one of the things that happened to the last administration is they expanded asylum, what it meant for asylum, for credible fear. Now, don't get me wrong. The asylum system is a golden beacon of hope around the world. It's something as Americans we should be proud of. But it was meant for when your country is committing genocide against you and your people. That's what it was for. It is broken now. It's being misused. When I meet with congressmen and senators, I say, you guys know Congress better than me, but you know what's going to happen. If you don't fix it now, and they're not going to, the next egregious attack, if there is, God forbid, one, and it's traced back to somebody who abused this system, this asylum system, came to this country and did a horrible act against this country, you guys, knee-jerk reaction will be to shut the system down. Why don't you fix it first? So what happened was it was expanded now to domestic violence. We're all against domestic violence. But that's not what the asylum system was for. It's been expanded to criminal activity, gangs, stuff like that. That's not what it was meant for. So I'll tell you a little story about asylum, what it's meant for. After my wife passed away in 2002, I met a woman that was born in Cambodia. And I said, oh, you're Cambodian. She said, no, I Thai people. So, okay, you're Thai. You're born in Cambodia, but she was very proud she was Thai. Well, her family, when she was 10 in 1980, escaped from Cambodia by building a raft and going across the Mekong. One of her brothers drowned. But what were they escaping from? We all remember the killing fields. Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge. They lived in a refugee camp for a year in Thailand. And then they went to the PI, the Philippine Islands, and lived there for a year in a refugee camp before a church in Oklahoma sponsored them. 2 years they waited. That's real asylum, people. That's real asylum. So they need to fix the system, because what they're doing now is, depending what geological area of the world they're coming from, they're prepped by the smuggling organization. And make no mistake about it, everything that comes across that southwest border that's illegal, money, weapons, people, whatever, is through the cartels. There was no mom and pop smuggling organizations. There were when I started. They don't exist anymore. You either belong directly lock, stock, and barrel to that cartel, or you pay what's called the plaza. If you don't, you die. And I worked Intel, and particularly watched the videos that we would seize from the cartels, particularly brutal ways. And your kids, particularly brutal ways. So there are smuggling organizations around the world that cover geological areas, but they work through the cartel. But depending where they're from, those people are from, they're told what to say. And I'll give you an example. I tell stories about me because I know they're true. So I was interviewing a guy from China, and he said, when I asked him, what's your credible fear? He said, I'm a Christian, I'm persecuted. Well, we all know that happens. All right, well, I'm a Christian. I'm not a good one, I need to work at it, but I know the central tenets of my faith. So I asked him, tell me about Jesus Christ. And he did this, and he said, oh, he was a friend of Buddha's. There was an 800-year period difference in time. I don't think JC and Buddha were cracking beers together. So that means you're lying. You don't know. That means you're not a Christian. That means you're lying about being persecuted. You're lying. We had a guy a little while ago. We have an agent that's fantastic at eliciting information without the person even knowing he's given up this information. So we're getting a lot of people from Mali, Malawi, Senegal, and what they're doing is claiming that they're Muslim, it's a Muslim country now, and that they're homosexual, and therefore they're facing death. Well, the one guy, he was able to find a guy's Facebook page, and there's the guy still in Mexico before he crossed into the U.S., pictures of his wife and kids on his Facebook page. I miss my wife so much, I miss my kids, can't wait to get them up here with me. He's not a homosexual, he's lying. When you catch people coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras, in the field, they'll tell you they're coming up for work and benefits. In the station, they'll tell you cartels, gangs, things like that. I remember interviewing a guy from El Salvador, and I said, so what's your credible fear? Oh, MS-13's after me. I said, well, when you got to Mexico, why didn't you stop there? Oh, they're after me. I said, but you just told me 5 minutes ago you're a dirt poor peasant farmer. You're that important to MS-13? Oh, yeah, they follow us. Okay. So where are you going? Oh, I'm going to L.A. I said, yo, idiot. You know MS-13 started in L.A., right? That's their hometown? So you're going away, trying to get away from MS-13 by going to where they're located. Makes sense to me. I like to screw with them sometimes. What are you trying to get away with? Gangs. Where are you going? Oakland. I said, I think people in Oakland are going to El Salvador to get away from the gangs. So the fact is they're lying. They're lying, they're lying, they're lying. The GAO did a report about 5 years ago, Government Accountability Office, 80% won't show up for their hearings. Now, you'll hear people on the left say that 90-some% get approved. Therefore, it's working. No, that's of the 20% who show up. So let me put that in numbers that make it easy to understand. Just say 100 a year put in for asylum. 80 won't show up. Now, it's worse now. The numbers are actually worse now, but use that as a baseline. 80 won't show up. 20 will. Now, those 20 will have a good case. Of course, if you had a good case, you will show up for your hearing. So those show up, and about 16 to 17 of them will be approved. So yeah, you do have a high approval rate of the 20% that show up, but that's not counting the 80% who never show up. We'll never see them again. We're never going to go after them again. ICE has trouble now. Democrats are protecting criminals in prison. They don't want us going after somebody who's just, didn't show up for his hearing. So the asylum system is screwed up when all you have to do is step foot on the U.S., either jump the fence or go to the port of entry and claim credible fear. We need to fix that system. I had a phone call the other day from a senator, one of his staffers. He's on the Homeland Security Committee, and I asked him about them doing something, and he said, I've never seen it this bad. We are not going to do anything. This is a Republican. Now, I blame Democrats for a lot, but I want everyone to understand this. Republicans are also to blame. Not as much. We had a Republican president for 2 years, a Republican-controlled House, and a Republican-controlled Senate for 2 years. Where's the national mandatory verify? Where's the money for the border wall? Where's any of that? It didn't happen. Controlled all 3 branches, or 2 branches. So there are, I mean, I talk to bless you. I talk to Republicans. Some of them will tell you by name who these Republicans are because they want a broken system. In the back rooms, they vote against this stuff. They want cheap labor. They want cheap labor. And that's a problem. They love Cesar Chavez now. I love Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez was against illegal immigration. He was against it. He would call the Border Patrol. In fact, he had his own goon squad that would thump on them when he was on strike. United Farm Workers, whether you think of that, but when he was on strike, if they hired scabs, new illegals, he had his own people thump on them. He understood that he could never get better labor, better conditions, better wages if they can keep bringing in illegals. So make no mistake, there are Republicans that are beholden to people like, and I'll say it, Tyson Foods. They get caught all the time, over and over again, hiring illegals by the thousands. I was at a speaking engagement last year. A guy came up to me and said, Chris, I'm embarrassed to tell you this. I'm a Republican. I'm a small business owner. I hire illegals. And he said, but give me a national mandatory verify, and I won't. But now I have to because my competition does, and they'll undersell me if I don't. So we blame Democrats, no doubt, but there's blame for Republicans too. Make no doubt about that, that people had 2 years to get something done, and they did absolutely nothing to fix this problem. So there's only a couple things we can do to fix it, and I can talk about that later on. Internally, without going through Congress, the best way is to go through Congress. But that's the problem now. De jure, we have a border. De facto, we don't. We're catching over 109,000, last month, 109,000 people we caught. They're not trying to get away from us. They just crossed the border in groups of 400 and stand there. We have now become part of the smuggling organization. They've lowered the prices. So coming from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras is back down to about $8,000. They cross the border in the southern part of Mexico. They get on buses. They come to the border. Within a day or two, they just cross, and then we become the northern arm of the smuggling organization. They used to have to hire load houses and load drivers. We do that now for them. We bring them to our station. That's the load house. We clean them up, shower them, feed them, get them medical, and then we put them on transport vans and bring them to the airport or bring them to the bus station. So we just saved the cartels the money that they'd have to put out on the northern part of it. We are the smuggling organization now. So unless we fix that, we're done. We don't have a border. And we're not vetting these people. We run fingerprint checks on them, but that doesn't tell us anything. We don't have connectivity to the databases. And make no mistake about it, it's not just those 3 countries. Last week we had in our custody people from 150 countries around the world. Everybody's claiming asylum. From India, it's a democracy. From Nepal, people go to Nepal to visit it. They're coming from around the world, and they're claiming amnesty. There was a poll done the other day down in, I don't remember if it was Honduras or Guatemala, that said 1/3 of the people in that country have said they're coming north. 1/3. I think they're a country of 48 million. That's 12 million people at least. You can't absorb that anytime that quickly. So that's the problem. So I just told you what the problems are. I told you how we can secure the border. So I want to open up very quickly to question and answers. My one caveat is I'll try to get to you. Put your hand up. It's questions, not statements. If you want to make statements, talk to them. I'm sure they'd gladly have you as a speaker down the road. No, I had a congressional guy that kept standing up making statements. And so question 1. So that's a great question. He wants to know how many miles of the border have no fence. So I'm going to repeat the questions. How many miles of the border have no fence? Well, there's no fence on almost the whole northern border. There's no fence on almost the whole northern border. So people are now going to Canada and coming south. But on the southwest border, I would say probably about 2/3 of it, maybe a half of it, have nothing, or 3 strands of cattle barbed wire. I worked areas in Ajo where I'd be out in nowhere's land, and I ended up in Mexico because there's nothing. You just simply drive across the border. So people will tell you there's all this fencing and walls, we don't need them. Of course we do. When you could just drive across the border in the desert somewhere in a truck with narcotics, that's a problem. It's a great question. Thank you. Next. Well, I'm glad that you still have, what she said is liberal friends, ask her, and I'm glad you still have liberal friends. We should not give up friends because they're another. So how they say that they're all vetted. That's simply not true. And the way to respond to that is ask them what kind of connectivity they think we have with every country around the world. So if you're coming from Bangladesh, we have no connectivity. They might not even have a system to keep track of people. So we run a record check that we call coming back 1040, negative derogatory. That means nothing unless you've been arrested in the U.S., or maybe like Germany, we'll have some kind of, we picked up a guy on Interpol war, at my station for war crimes. But that's because Interpol does connect with us. But China might have a great system, but they're not connecting with us. You know, Syria might have had a great system. It's blown apart. So what you tell them is we don't have connectivity with these people, or they don't have a database. We had a guy in our custody. Here's a great example. Chula Vista Station had a guy in custody. They were going to release him. They questioned him. They were going to release him because we have no space, pending a hearing. And on the way out, he mentioned something about having just got out of prison in El Salvador. Oh, whoa. Let's talk about that. Come here. He had committed a homicide in El Salvador. And so they checked directly with the El Salvador government. Yes, this guy was a murderer. So until he ran his mouth before he walked out the door, he was going to walk out the door. So we can't check a lot of these countries. The majority around the world, we don't have connectivity with them, or they don't have a system for us to run records checks through. Next question. I'll come back to you, and then I'm going to get back down there. That's a fantastic question. And so what the question was, what's the problem, or how much of a problem is it that these people are claiming that these kids are their families? Okay, that's partly Trump's fault. Trump rolled out a system last summer and said, prosecute everybody, but he didn't. There was no planning. There was no resources. It fell apart. It gave us all a black eye. Trump had to walk it back, if you remember this, and he gave out a presidential directive saying we don't separate families. He said that. So we can't separate families. Well, there's a court decision, a Flores decision, says we can't hold kids more than 20 days. So if we can't separate that kid from you, we can't hold you more than 20 days. So what they learned very quickly is to bring somebody with them that's their kid. We have said since 2014, when the first influx came under President Obama, we wanted to do DNA swab testing. Not for enforcement purposes, but for finding out if that was in fact a family unit. Because we're terrified of human trafficking for sexual slavery and sexual uses. And we're getting pushback from the left. I don't get it, from the Democrats. I don't understand that. But it's a tremendous problem. We've had people where you have a guy holding a girl's hand, and she's 12 or so, and she's terrified, and his daughter, and he doesn't remember her name. So we first saw that with the gypsies, real honest-to-God gypsies, the Roma, the Romani. Don't call them Romanians. The Romanians get pissed. The Roma. They were coming from Spain, Italy, and a subset from Ireland. This is a few years ago. And the men were coming in. They were being held in custody. They didn't like that. So then they started bringing their wives. Well, they were being held too. So then they all of a sudden came up with babies. And we really just didn't think they were babies. And I could tell you some stories why, but we just didn't think so. And we wondered, where are these babies coming from and where are they going? And we finally got a group to admit to it, that the baby was provided to them as a prop. That should terrify you. Where's that baby coming from? Where's it going? And it's worse now. I think they just started doing some DNA testing, and they're finding out that at least a third, and that's just the beginning days, are not familial relationships. That should terrify you. We also know now that the cartels are providing kids in Tijuana. The family will rent them out. The kid comes north. His family, they're all released. The kid just goes back down, through the Sally Port back into Mexico. But what happens if that person decides to keep that kid? So it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. So he said that Donald Trump has said that he's replacing a lot of substandard wall or fencing, and that he'll have the whole thing complete in a year and a half. Yes and no. The first part is, I had mentioned where I got hit in the head with a rock from a smuggler. That fence was there. We call it the Duncan Hunter fence, from Duncan Hunter the Elder, retired Congressman Duncan Hunter. It's about 8 foot high. It was never meant to really be a fence. It was made from leftover from Vietnam metal that they used to use to make helicopter landing fields. And so they put it up with the National Guard and so on in the mid-'90s. I would tell you an asthmatic 8-year-old could climb it. So what happened with me was I chasing a group of 4 up against it. I grabbed one guy, threw him on the ground, had my foot on his back so he couldn't go anywhere. 3 jumped up on the fence, 1 jumped down to Mexico, ran away. The 2 on the fence, 1 was a smuggler, I recognized him, and 1 was his trainee. They actually have trainees. It was on-the-job training. And they were screaming at me in Spanish and English, and the smuggler was pissed at me. I'd taken a ladder from him earlier in the day. And he was yelling and screaming at me to let the guy go. And so I pulled out my ass, my expandable steel baton. I struck the fence. They jumped down back into the Mexican side. And here's where I screwed up. I forgot how easy and quickly it is to climb that fence. I put them out of they weren't in my tactical radar screen. This guy wanted to start fighting. I bent down to hook him up, put cuffs on him. The smuggler came up with a softball-sized rock and threw it directly on top of my head. That fence has been replaced within the last few months with one that's almost 30 foot high, in areas 18 foot high. That would never happen to me then. So it protects the men and women of the Border Patrol as they protect you. So that is happening. They are replacing the old stuff with better stuff. As far as having the whole area that we want fenced in a year and a half, ain't going to happen. Just physically, they can't build it that quick. But they are working on it. I mean, make no mistake, they are working on it. So he asked what's happening with that thorny situation with the They don't like being called the Papago anymore. So they're the Tohono O'odham. I worked on the reservation. They absolutely hate us. I can't speak for every single one of them, but as a whole, they made it known they didn't want us on their reservation. They drive in and out of Mexico. It's a tough thing because it's a sovereign nation, but we also can control our borders. So I can't tell you much about it. Is that it's just we continually try to work with them. We continually know narcotics comes through there. That's just because of the way it is. That's the way it is. We do need to put some fencing there, though, because when I worked down there, 3 SUVs came through with narcotics in them. I went after them. They came up FR1. There's supposed to be 5 agents down there. I was the only one there because we were shorthanded. They turned around. They started going back to Mexico. I went to intercept them, and then I realized that the intel report the day before said they were going to shoot us because they were tired of losing their loads. There were 2 men in each vehicle. There's 6 of them. Looked like they're going to ram me. I'm not a stupid guy. I hit the brakes. I was 50 miles away from my nearest backup. 50 miles away from my nearest backup. And I just didn't want to lie there bleeding out. So they went back into Mexico. They didn't come in the U.S., but there's no gate there. There's no fence there. So that's the one thing we can do is build infrastructure and work out something with the tribes because we still have the right to defend our borders. Next question. All right, she called it the Northern Distribution. Says, I never heard that. But the fact is we're overwhelmed at the border. They are flying people now from Texas, RGV, into San Diego to different stations to be processed. Even though we're being hammered, they're being hammered worse. So we just don't have the processing space. We don't have the agents. The other day these people are very ill. We take them to the hospital. We have to have 2 agents per prisoner. The other day, out of San Diego sector, we had 150 agents in a 1-day period and hospital watch. So we have to bring these people to other stations to be processed. So they're coming here, and then ultimately they'll be taken either to a private shelter or we'll directly drop them off at the bus station or the airport. So she asked about the caravans, if anybody was supporting them. So I'm not as concerned about the caravans as I were before because now the smuggling, the cartels are involved, and they're doing it very regularly, and they have bus service and all that. But the original cartels, there were several groups behind them. I will tell you one of the ones that the Mexican government itself, I read the intel report. I was still working then. The Mexican government itself believed that one of the groups that was helping organize this was Venezuelan intelligence. So that's back to the bad old days, the Cold War days, and that means Cuban intelligence, that means Russian intelligence. Anything that causes us harm, that causes societal pressure, that causes us to waste money, that causes us internal grief, that's, in their book, is good stuff. So I have no doubt, this is the Mexican government saying it, that Venezuelan intelligence was one of the actors involved behind it. I'm going to go down this way now. Well, so her question is how much can we absorb? And when are they going to recognize there's a problem? I'll tell you right now, even CNN and New York Times are admitting there's a problem. Jed Johnson from Obama's administration is out there saying there's a problem. So they recognize there's a problem. Now some people don't want to recognize that it's recognized, but even liberal papers like NYT or again CNN are actually saying there's a problem on the border. Jed Johnson says it's out of control. So I don't know how many the population of Orlando is, as you brought up. Okay, so it would probably take about 3 months now to reach that. So we are going to top over 1 million people this year that we apprehend. The highest in 10 years. So yeah, and I've been on OAN. So this fiscal year, we will go over 1 million apprehensions. The difference before, and we haven't had that many apprehensions in 10 years, but even the left likes to say, well, back in the 1900s, when I was here, in the late 1990s, it was higher. Right, but there's a difference. We were removing them then. We're not removing them then. They're all being released into the United States. So there's a difference between apprehending 2 million people in a year but removing almost all of them and apprehending 1 million people in a year but letting them all stay. At what level does it overload us? It is. Cities are already being overloaded. Todd Gloria and others, Assemblyman Todd Gloria, who I know, Faulkner, they're pushing to get $5 million from the state for San Diego to build a homeless shelter. And my problem with that was, but last year, 2 years ago, you didn't ask for $5 million to build a homeless shelter for veterans. But you want to build a shelter for these people. I believe in being humane. The Reverend mentioned that. Humanely, justly, fairly, firmly. But where is the justice when all of a sudden you say you could find $5 million in a budget to build a homeless shelter for these people who are coming here the way they are, but 2 years ago you couldn't find it for homeless veterans? You got to be kidding me. Next question. So the question was a fantastic question. Was why do we have to let them in to claim asylum? And that's one of the things we want to be changed by law. So our feeling is that you claim it in the country you reside in through a consulate or the embassy, and you await your term there. And there's talk about trying to do that. Now, I don't know if we could do it through CFRs and rules and regulations, or it actually needs an act of Congress. Again, if it needs an act of Congress, it ain't going to happen. So another thing that we've thought about that we said might be a good thing to do, and this one I don't know exactly how it works, but I know it's with the State Department and the UN, it's getting a country designated basically as a safe haven. So Germany is a safe haven. The UK is a safe haven. Canada, us. All those countries are safe havens. And the way that works is, say you came from Syria and you ended up in Germany. You're in a safe haven. You don't then get to say, oh, I want to go to Canada. No, you're any good. So we need to get Mexico to be declared and accept the status of a safe haven. So there's a lot of crime down there, but then on the other hand, Mexico tells everybody, come down and visit, tourism, it's safe, come on, come down. So you can't have it both ways. If we could do that, that would tremendously alter and stop the problem. The one thing they are trying to do now is saying that you will be sent back to Mexico to wait. And believe it or not, a federal judge just gave, a couple months ago, gave Trump a win on that, saying you can do that. So let's see if that starts getting spun up. So she had a really good question. They're all good questions. So she said, like, who's getting wealthy off this? Well, it's Republicans too. People are making money on shelters. My wife just mentioned, and I don't remember who it was, but mentioned a name on the right who's going to be getting contracts to run some of these shelters. So trust me, it's the elite. It could be George Soros. Look, I said this last night at the little dinner I was they kind enough to invite me to, is when they're in Davos, Switzerland, once a year, the rich and the elites go. I can't stand George Soros, but I don't like the Koch brothers either. They finally come out. People realize that they're open border advocates. Do you think George Soros and the Koch brothers, when they walk into a very expensive lounge, are at each other's throats? Or do you think they're trying to figure out how to make more money and power? So, there are elites that are making money off this. And that's a great question. Follow the money, folks. That's always a good line, is follow the money. Who's making money off this, be it shelters, be it running buses, doing things like that type of thing. Jewish services, they're all involved. And it's funny, it's Catholics. I talked at a Catholic parish that was very conservative, in a good way. But a lot of this, look, the Catholic Church, I'm not Catholic, but my wife is. I'm Lutheran. But the Roman Catholic Church in the U.S. is losing members left and right. The sex scandals and all that, which they handled poorly. I'm an admirer of the Roman Catholic Church, not the way they handled that. But the fact is they see where we're going to get new members. And they see it, a lot of them see this liberation theology, and they see illegals are going to be, we're going to tell them we're there protecting you, join us. So Trump is trying to start a thing where, because there are legal issues about people were contributing to this guy's fund, and I think he meant well, to build the wall, the infrastructure. They're trying to find a way to make that legal. So they would pay with private, where they would be able to. Let me talk about one thing real quick about California being a state, a sanctuary state. So when I was first director of legislative political affairs, I dealt in the federal arena. That was my realm, Congress and Senate and so on and so forth. I didn't want to get involved in the nonsense at the state level. I had to because of this idiotic state sanctuary law. So I'll give you an example how that works, that affects you day to day. Our guys pulled over a drunk driver. We don't enforce state laws normally. We called the local constabulary, the local police, to come out and get the guy, and they refused. So they said they couldn't. I get it. We had to let a drunk driver drive down the road. So there is a huge problem with the sanctuary laws that are causing us harm and not allowing us to do our jobs. We've had this problem now with they won't honor our holds. They used to do it all the time. They'd call me to the downtown Sallyport in San Diego PD. They'd say, we got this guy. I talked to him. Yes, he's illegal. Here's a hold. When you're done with him, let us know. We'll come get him. They don't honor them anymore. They just let them go. So we have huge problems with the state sanctuary. But the thing that's funny about that is, in 2012, $153 million was programmed to replace some of the fencing, the same fencing that was 8 foot high where I got hurt, from the ocean to just east of the Otay Mesa Port of Entry. $153 million, programmed under President Obama. But because of De Leon and some others, there is a bill, SB 30, that's sitting in Sacramento. They're smart enough not to let it drop because it's unconstitutional, but it would take probably 2 years for somebody to fight it. But what it says is if you work on the wall project or fencing projects or anything like that, you lose your state contracts. So when we put the $153 million out for bid, nobody would bid on it. We couldn't figure it out. And then I don't know if anybody knows William Lujaness from Fox News. He's a friend of Norman and I's. He did some stuff. I don't think he ever got into the story too much, but he contacted and found out in Sacramento there's an association for everything. There's a contractors association. After some hemming and hawing, they told him the contractors were terrified to put in for this contract because they knew they'd win ultimately in a few years in court, but they'd be out of business if they lost their state contracts. So we rebid it. Now, you know, in California, there's 2 states you're supposed to hate if you're a liberal, Arizona and Texas. Well, the company that got it is from Texas. So $153 million is going into the coffers into Texas. So that's a problem with this. So I love to bring that up to liberals, but that was under Obama that was approved, the funding was found, and yet that money would have gone into South Bay and San Diego, and instead most of it's going into Texas. I think that's hilarious. So it was a good question. That do we have the power? Does the president have the power to put the Army, the United States Army, on the border? Yes and no. We have agreements, treaties with Mexico about keeping the border demilitarized. We can't put like M1 battle tanks down there. We do use the military to help us out. A lot of that's National Guard, and unless we federalize them, that's up to the state. Newsom has pulled most of them. The new mayor, the new governor of New Mexico has pulled their National Guard. But yeah, they could probably federalize and put more down there. The problem is the military is still, under 8 years under President Obama, is still hurting. Still hurting. 2 ongoing wars. You know, we want all the help we can get, but I don't want to see my military stretch in something they really probably shouldn't be doing, because I want them ready to respond to something the Russians do, the Chinese do, the North Koreans do, the Iranians do. So it'd be difficult to put the military down there as a military force because of treaties we have with Mexico. So it was a good question, but yes, ma'am. So that was, man, you guys have excellent questions. Thank you. I'll be here till nighttime. We have 15 more minutes. So the question was about diseases coming across the border. Oh my God, it's horrifying. It is third world diseases, diseases we haven't heard from yet. My guys are exposed to it. We have, the other day in my station alone, they had 1 cell quarantined because of lice, 1 cell quarantined because of scabies, 1 cell quarantined because of MRSA, and 1 because of typhus. Well, those cells were out of service because they were quarantined because people in them had those diseases or those issues. You're going to see this hitting cities like you've never seen before. And we have some idiots in this country who are anti-vaxxers, and I'm sorry if you are one of them, you're an idiot. I don't care. I make no apology about it. The fact is there's no mercury in this stuff anymore, and that's out of my wheelhouse, but the fact is there's a lot of people, and you know, it's typically it's a liberal white house life in the suburbs who has far too much time on her hand and gets on the internet and gets wrapped up in crazy stuff. But we have whole groups and pockets of places that are not being immunized, and now these diseases are coming back. And I'm terrified of seeing a real serious outbreak of things that we thought were long gone, long gone. So yeah, that's a terrifying prospect. The first question was, should you as an adult go back and get re-immunized? That's between you and your doctor. That's out of my wheelhouse. I don't want to answer that. I would, but that's up to you. The second question is, what about people who've been here for a long time, who have paid their taxes, they're here illegally? And let me get into that real quick. I use the term illegal alien, I'll tell you why. And I do this with groups left of center. I get no one person is illegal as a person, your personhood, you're not illegal. But that is the actual legal term we use. If you're not born in the United States or naturalized citizen, you're an alien. Whether you're a visitor or whatever, you're an alien. If you're here illegally, you're an illegal alien. I'm not going to contort myself and jump through hoops to become an undocumented.
Amen.
So look, there are people here that are illegally who work hard, who have paid taxes. Now I don't, but some do. Who have committed no criminal acts. Yes, that's going to have to be addressed. So here's the thing. The left likes to say there's a lot of people like to say there's 11 million illegal aliens here. That's simply not true. That came from a Pew report about 10 years ago, and they said 10 years ago between 11 and 18 million. Everybody latched on the lowest number because it worked better for them. The U.S. Border Patrol will tell you there's probably about 30 million people that are illegal in this country. Visa overstays, all that. When you jump the fence, you broke the law. That's USC 1325. That's a federal misdemeanor. But if you overstay your visa, it's just a civil offense. So between all those, though, you have 30 million people that are here illegally or unlawfully. To solve this problem, you have to break it down into manageable chunks. The president, and he has not done this, needs to appoint a blue ribbon committee, a commission, whatever you want to call it, with heavy hitters, people that have the chops, people have the gravitas, people have the intelligence, from every agency in the government that's impacted. I mean from IRS, Department of Labor, Coast Guard, Federal Marshal Service, FBI, Border Patrol, ICE, everybody that's involved with people that enforcement of immigration laws or labor laws pertain to them, you get them all on the table and you come up with one, as physicists are always looking for, one grand unified strategy to address the problem. And then you resource it. And you break it down to manageable chunks. So you have 30 million people. Are we or should we deport 30 million people? No. No. If a guy's been here for 30 years and worked hard, I disagree with that. So here's the thing. Now, I will tell you, if I pick you up and you've been here 30 years and you have not taken the time to adjust your status, and I pick you up and you happen to be in a car that I'm doing a car stop on, thank you, my friend. Oh, bueno. So too bad on you. I arrested a Mexican doctor, and she'd been here for 20-some years, and she was pissed. But she never took the time to adjust her status. My wife's mother is pretty liberal, but she thinks it's hilarious. Well, she gets pissed. Well, she sees on TV somebody crying. They've been here 30 years, and they're getting deported, and they didn't adjust their status. And she'll tell you, they had 3 freaking times. She'll be a pinche. They had 3 times to adjust their status. Shame on them if they didn't. But putting that aside, you have to break that $30 million down to, okay, let's take out the criminals first. Can we all admit if you've committed a crime while you're here illegally, you need to go? Okay. And you might quibble about that. You're going to have people to the left say, well, look, disorderly conduct. So you go back and forth. And that's what compromise is. That's how government works. You don't always get your way 100%. A good compromise, nobody's happy. So we go back and forth and we go, okay, nonviolent misdemeanors that aren't domestic violence, that aren't driving while intoxicated, that aren't narcotics. Okay, yeah, you know, you had a suspended license, you forgot. We'll come to some compromise. Those criminals that fall above that line, they're all removed. So that's one group you've addressed, a rather large group. The next one, we're going to look into fraud, welfare fraud, benefits fraud, things like that. Or if you've been in the system, look, we all fall on hard times. That's why we have a safety net. I don't even care if you're here illegally and you're on that safety net because you got a family, you've been working hard, you paid into it. Okay, again, we're going to go back and forth. The left might say, well, let's say 10 years or more on welfare, they need to go. And somebody on the right is going to say, no, none. So you say, okay, 2 years. If you've been on benefits more than a total 2 years since you've been here, you're kind of, look, my grandmother and my family came through Ellis Island from County Antrim in Ireland. They had a sign, people had a sign for them, sponsor them, saying they wouldn't go on the dole. So, okay, there's your second group. If somebody's been here and has been here illegally and has paid nothing into the system, has been collecting benefits, you have to go. Now, you've just narrowed that chunk down. So you've just taken $30 million and taken a big bite out of it. So then you're going to have to find out, and I don't call this amnesty, you're going to have to find a system where they'll jump through some hoops if they want, pay some fines because they cut the line, learn English, and again, you find a certain age. I don't expect somebody that's 80 years old to learn English if they don't speak English, but you come up and you say, okay, if you want to stay now, and I would never grant them citizenship because they cut the line, but I would give them what's called a LAPR status, green card, lawfully admitted for permanent residence, and you would solve the problem in chunks. So that's what I'm talking about. You asked a question, I went off a little bit on the tangent, but about what do you do with somebody who's been here for a long time and they pay their taxes and blah, blah. Well, that's it. You say to them, do you want to stay? Here's the process to follow. Otherwise, then you have to leave too. So the question basically boils down to is, are we willing to work with the government of Mexico, our Congress, and so on and so forth? I would suggest mostly yes. We give aid. The president now of Mexico just turned down aid. He said it has, we don't want to buy any military equipment with it. We don't want it. So it's more, does this socialist president want to work with the United States? And I think at this point in time, no. And I think a lot of people in Mexico are upset because he's letting these caravans through, violating Mexican sovereignty. And I think he has an ulterior motive. So do I think some of the other leadership in some of these socialist countries down there. But do I think Congress is willing to work with Mexico? I think to an extent that they're not just dumping money into Mexico and watching it disappear. But yeah, they are willing to work with them. And we work at lower levels with them all the time. Right now, the president of Mexico is saying, I don't want to do that. I have time for probably about 2 or 3 more questions. You, sir. So here's your problem in California. And I say this because I'm leaving next year. So it'll be on you guys. Probably Texas. So the question was, can they legally, we see that Governor Newsom is going to, his answer to that is just make it all legal. We're going to give you this, free housing, free medical. Is it legal? Well, you guys, and me too, we've allowed them to get a supermajority. So yes, they can. Somebody asked me the other day after another speaking engagement, do I think we can ever get a Republican majority again in California? No, I don't. But you have to stop them from having a supermajority because they don't even need to talk to Republicans. They can do whatever they want. So do I think they can legally do that, my friend? Yes, I do. I certainly do. Ma'am, the question was, are we ever going to do anything about this? Is the next House going to do anything? I would suggest if you get a Republican House, then you better make sure they know what you expect. They do listen to you. People ask me what my asks are, and I'll get into that now real quick. You need to contact your congressmen, your senators. I don't care if it is Dianne Feinstein. They still track who calls and what they say. It's important. They do pay attention to it. Elect people that say, and that you believe them, that they will address this. I will tell you one thing we can do internally, so I don't want to leave this on doom and gloom. One of my union reps 2 years ago did a white paper on it. Brandon Judd brought it to the president's attention. Is it apparently by law, we can appoint senior Border Patrol agents and give them some training, cross-designate them as hearing asylum officers. And so the program supposedly they're going to start is at the stations that are on the line, that are facing this every day, they would conduct their hearings in the norm. When you're just interviewing somebody to enter them into the system, you'd be conducting. So when you heard them lying, you wouldn't just be putting it in a report. Hopefully some hearing officer would hear it 3 years from now. You'd say denied. And so that is some hope. All right, so now we're done with the questions. Look, I know you guys are going to thank me and all that, so blah, 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 thank you. But I want to thank you all, and I want you to think about this. So I had the easiest union job. When I would meet with congressmen, senators, I would tell them I have the easiest union job in the world. My men and women want to work harder. Let them work harder. The men and women of the United States Border Patrol took an oath. And I'll tell you this pisses me off when I have some congressmen, I've told them this, congresswomen, who want to chastise my men and women. How dare you, how dare you, how reprehensible of you to chastise the men and women of the Border Patrol for doing what they took an oath of office to do, to enforce the laws that you passed, that Congress passed. Reprehensible. So, what I want you to do is whatever you can by making phone calls, electing the right people, is to allow the men and women to do the job you pay them to do the job they want to do. Many of them are vets. Many of them still serve. Let them protect the Constitution of the United States. Let them protect the country of the United States, and let them protect the people therein. Thank you.